As we round out our first unit together in political science, I thought it would probably make sense for us to spend a few minutes talking about the state of American politics today. And we're going to be spending some time looking at how Americans perceive our political landscape. And what's especially notable is that we have high rates of political polarization currently and very low levels of trust. And so that's something we're going to explore throughout this video. Before we do that, though, I want you to imagine you're going on vacation. Okay, and so you got to decide where you're going to go. One of the places you could go is the North Pole. You could walk all the way up there, or you could fly up there. You go up to the North Pole, you're probably going to see who? Santa Claus and his elves. All the reindeer are up there. But another half of the class is going to decide to go on vacation to the South Pole. And instead of seeing reindeer, they're going to be seeing penguins down there. Okay, imagine that. Let's imagine we have two groups and they're both at the equator, and half of them starts to go north and they're going to go all the way to that North Pole. The other half is going to go south. They're going to go all the way to that South Pole. What happened? That group, who was all together there in the middle, they've begun to move apart over time to the poles. Okay, and that's how I kind of like to begin thinking about this concept of polarization. We have this group and they become further and further apart. And that's exactly what we're seeing in our American government right now. So a topic that you'll hear in the media and throughout this class is something called polarization. And that's the idea that when it comes to politics, American voters have become increasingly polarized. And it's not just on how they view politics. We're going to see that it's also how they feel about their fellow Americans. So ideological polarization is going to touch upon those political ideologies that we looked at earlier. Are you comfortable with a big government, or would you prefer a small government? You know, how do you see the role that government should play in society? Now, those are ideological questions. And we can know where somebody's ideology is by asking them questions about what they think about policies. What should the law look like? So we're going to look at ideological polarization, but there's a newer type of polarization that we're beginning to see as well, and that's called affective polarization. Your affect is how you feel. It's your emotions. And what we're seeing is increasingly tribal emotional feelings on the part of Americans for people that have differences of political opinion. So we're going to find that people increasingly dislike and distrust people from the other party. And we're going to see some really interesting things in this video having to do with that polarization. Let's take a look, and we're going to get back in our time machine. We're going to go to the year 1994, when I was in elementary school, and many of you were not even born yet. And we're going to take a look at some data that was collected through surveys. Essentially, what would happen is you would pick up the phone, there'd be somebody who's doing research, and you would call somebody up. Hello, ma'am, how are you today? I'd like to ask you some questions. And they ask questions like this. Now, I'm going to give you a choice. Pick the option that sounds best to you. And so the person on the other end of the phone would give one conservative position and one liberal position. So for instance, what do you agree with more? The government is almost always wasteful and inefficient, or government often does a better job than people give it credit for. Now, your answer to that question would seem to indicate whether you're a conservative or a liberal. And the caller was going to go through and ask a number of other questions that touched on all kinds of political issues. And what we found during that time was that there were some people who were on the sort of more consistent side of either party. You'd have some people who would answer all of the questions consistently liberal, but you'd also have some people who were answering all consistently conservative. But that wasn't most Americans. Most Americans fell right in the middle. And as you can see on this chart, most Americans were going to have a mix of both conservative and liberal positions. In fact, that was the majority of Americans. There might be some reasons for this. Imagine the media environment in 1994. Whether you were a Democrat or a Republican, you're probably watching the same news channels. The internet hadn't made its way into most people's homes yet at that time. And we can also see the same data, but this time what we're going to do is we're going to break it out by political party. Here with the blue, that's the Democratic Party, and they're a bit more to the left. They're a bit more liberal. And the red that you see here are the Republicans, and they're a bit more to the right. They're a bit more conservative. We'd probably expect to see that. But what else do we see? There's a lot of people who are somewhere in the middle. Regardless of whether they're Democrat or Republican, they'd probably feel pretty comfortable within either party. And then we also have this thing, median Democrat, median Republican. That's going to be essentially the halfway point within the political party. So we can kind of map, half of Democrats are on this side, half of Republicans are on this side. That's going to get our median. And you can see that there was some space between the median Democrat and the median Republican in 1994, but it wasn't that much, right? Let's again get into our time machine. And now we have to go forward into the future. And the year is 2017. And what have we seen here? There are fewer Americans that are in the center, that have that mixed, more moderate view. And consistently, you have members of the Democratic Party moving further and further towards the ideological left, and members of the Republican Party who are moving further and further towards the ideological right. There's more and more people who are consistently answering those questions in a more highly ideological way. And so that is, again, going to show us through our ideological preferences that polarization taking place. But it's really not just about how we see the issues. This is some more recent data, and it shows that regardless of whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, individuals that are part of those parties have become increasingly likely to say that members of the other political party are close-minded, they're dishonest, they're even immoral or unintelligent, and maybe even lazy. This isn't just about policy differences. This is more like a prejudice, right? This is a disagreement or an assumption about somebody else from a different political party with these negative personality traits. That is something new that we're seeing in politics, and frankly, a little concerning, to be honest. So that really characterizes this polarized environment, can tell us a lot about the state of our political life in the United States today. But it's not just how people see other Americans. It's also the faith and the trust that they have in our institutions. Take a look at this graph. What this one's going to show you is how much Americans trust mass media. And if you go back to the 1970s, very high rates. Now, most people would say they have a great deal of trust in the media. And what we've seen over the years, as researchers have looked into this, fewer and fewer people say they trust the media. In fact, today, more than a third of Americans say they have absolutely no trust in media at all. And we've seen that that's gone sky high since about 2018. Especially coming out of the COVID pandemic, whether people are on the political left or political right, there has been damage in terms of their views of the mass media and even within the government itself. So if you look again, do you trust the media? That has been on the decline. But also, do you trust the government to almost always or most of the time do the right thing? And here we see, again, very low opinion about our own government, right? So only about 1 in 5 Americans today would say that, generally speaking, most of the time they trust the government. Okay, so why does all of this stuff matter? Like, why should we focus on this at the beginning of a political science class about American government? Well, the reason is because knowing about this stuff can help make you a more informed consumer, okay? You're going to be having conversations with people, and often people who disagree with you. And you might wonder, like, well, why is the temperature so high? Why are people so upset? This kind of gives you a map of what's happening out there. So it's going to give you that extra context to help you navigate politics and political conversations, number one. But number two, maybe there are some reasons that we should be skeptical, either of the media or of the government. That's up to you to decide. And it might help you with having this background knowledge to be more critical in your evaluation, either of news stories in the media, including comments made by members of the government. It can be helpful to kind of see these trends and to know whether you fit in with that pattern or not. So we've covered some interesting ground together, I think, this week. And I think we have set a really solid foundation that we're going to be able to use for the rest of the semester together. So to you who's watching this video, I want to say thank you for making it to the end. And just know that these will continue to be available for you throughout the semester. My door's always open to you. I'm looking forward to an incredible semester, and have a great week. We'll see you next time.